You don't hate yourself. You hate the version of you they taught you to become. They told you to grow, evolve, become your best self. But what they didn't tell you is that this never-ending pursuit of improvement would quietly destroy your inner peace. Every podcast, every book, every breakthrough only made you feel more broken. Because underneath the spiritual hustle and psychological discipline, there's a deeper belief silently running the show. You are not enough yet. And that belief is poison. In a world addicted to performance, even healing becomes a show. Meditation turns into a competition. Journaling becomes a form of self-surveillance. Therapy becomes another place to prove you're doing the work. But what if I told you this obsession with progress is just another trauma response? Just more shame, repackaged in enlightened language. Carl Jung called it the ego pretending to be the self. And the more you chase it, the more distant your true healing becomes. This video is not about self-help. It's about self-truth. It's not another roadmap to fix what's wrong. It's an invitation to stop running from what's real. You'll finally understand why you're exhausted from trying so hard, and why all your effort has only made the pain worse. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see that the part of you you've been trying to silence is the very thing that can set you free. The paradox of endless self-improvement. There's a peculiar irony hidden in the chase for self-improvement. The more someone feels the need to fix themselves, the more broken they believe they are. This cycle isn't just exhausting. It's rooted in a distorted self-perception forged by perfectionism and internalized shame. Every new attempt to upgrade the self comes wrapped in the unconscious message, you are not enough as you are. Carl Jung might say this reflects a split between the self and the shadow, a refusal to accept the imperfection that makes us whole. The art of living, in this context, gets replaced by the obsession with constantly becoming. Let's face it, when personal development turns into a full-time job, something's off. Reading books, journaling, meditating, these are powerful tools, no doubt. But when they're driven by an unconscious script of inadequacy, they become traps. The mind turns into a perfectionist taskmaster, turning inner life into a never-ending checklist. This relentless striving can sound noble, but underneath lies a wound that no accomplishment can heal. People start treating their lives like malfunctioning machines, not complex souls in a process of individuation. You see it all the time. People jumping from therapist to retreat to yet another course. Maybe this one will finally fix me, they think. But what if the deeper problem isn't that they're broken, but that they believe healing means erasing every trace of their humanity? Psychoanalysis reminds us, repression is never the solution. The real wisdom lies not in constant transformation, but in learning to sit with the discomfort of being unfinished. That's where true conscience and authenticity emerge. When someone identifies as a never-ending project, they begin to confuse healing with punishment. They become rigid, obsessed with control, resistant to uncertainty. They reject joy unless it's earned through self-discipline. But growth doesn't thrive under pressure, it shrivels. That inner dialogue, the voice that once whispered hope, becomes a drill sergeant barking commands. And ironically, the person loses access to the very thing they were trying to cultivate, peace. The more improvement becomes compulsive, the less transformative it is. The self gets reduced to a problem to be solved, rather than a mystery to be lived. And that pressure? It eats away at one's sense of self-worth, replacing curiosity with anxiety. But here's the kicker. What if the real path isn't upward but inward? What if the key isn't a fix, but to understand? That question alone begins to unravel the second trap, the wounded identity still waiting for permission to be whole. The trap of the wounded identity. Most people don't realize they're carrying an outdated version of themselves, one that was built in pain. This wounded identity isn't just a scar, it's a filter. It quietly whispers, you must become better to be lovable. And that whisper shapes everything, from relationships to spirituality, from career ambitions to self-talk. Carl Jung called this the complex, a psychic not formed around unprocessed trauma. Instead of being seen as a human with both light and shadow, the person becomes a self-rejection machine. Their whole inner dialogue revolves around earning worth, not recognizing it. That's why self-help often doesn't help. The books pile up, the therapy sessions multiply, but something still feels missing. It's because the work is being done from a place of unworthiness. The self is not being nourished, it's being managed. Healing becomes a project of appearance, a desperate attempt to appear healed rather than accepted. This isn't autocura, it's cosmetic surgery for the soul. And beneath it all lies the same ache. Will I ever be enough to simply exist without explanation? It's painful to realize, but many spiritual seekers are driven not by truth, but by shame. The obsession with meditation, with controlling the mind, with perfect posture and calm tone, it's all a mask. They're not cultivating presence, they're avoiding the mess. But the psyche doesn't respond to pressure. The more one tries to repress the wounded child within, the louder it cries through exhaustion, anxiety, perfectionism, and even illness. Acceptance isn't optional, it's the door out of the cage. Here's something practical. Try journaling without editing yourself. Write as if no one will ever read it, not even you. Don't analyze, don't beautify, just let your inner life speak. You'll be surprised how often the voice underneath isn't asking for healing. It's begging to be held. This isn't just therapy. It's a return to yourself. It's a crack in the mask, a rupture in the control. And maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of compassion rather than correction. Because if you're always trying to fix the wound, you never let it breathe. You never let it teach. That identity, shaped by rejection and reinforced by constant effort, was never the real you. It was a defense. And the irony? The moment you stop trying to escape it, you begin to meet the one beneath it. But that realization, of course, brings you face to face with a deeper question. What if your healing is just another form of self-harm? The obsession with progress as self-violence. At first glance, it looks like discipline. Waking up early, meditating, reading, journaling, healing. But look closer, and you'll see a war being waged. A war not against laziness or ignorance, but against the self. When improvement turns into obsession, it becomes a spiritualized form of self-hatred. The rituals may change, but the voice remains the same. Do more, be more, fix yourself. Carl Jung would say the ego has hijacked the soul's journey, turning individuation into performance. And that, my friend, is where progress becomes punishment. Here's the trap. People think they're evolving when they're actually just escaping. The same fear of rejection, the same guilt, the same shame, it all gets dressed up in yoga mats and highlight pens. But underneath, the pressure hasn't changed. In fact, it's grown sharper. The mind becomes a tyrant, never satisfied. One more book, one more therapy, one more breakthrough. And yet the exhaustion only deepens. Why? Because it's not healing. It's obsession wearing a spiritual mask. Ever heard someone say, I just need to get my energy right? Or, once I align my chakras, I'll finally feel okay. It sounds enlightened, but it often hides a desperate need for control. Real consciousness work isn't about domination, it's about surrender. You're not supposed to bend your psyche into submission. You're supposed to listen, let breathe, let scream if it must. True wisdom doesn't emerge through force. It rises through silence, through space, through radical inner permission. Here's something worth doing. Stop for a day. Literally, stop. Don't read another self-help post. Don't journal. Don't analyze. Instead, sit on your balcony and feel the breeze. Walk aimlessly. Watch a leaf fall. And notice how your mind panics at the lack of improvement. That panic, that's the ego, terrified of losing control. But you're not your ego. You're the one who's watching. That distance between observer and thought is where healing truly begins. And yet, as this silence settles in, another question emerges. What happens when even the cure becomes the curse? What do you do when your desire to feel better is the very thing that's keeping you trapped? That's when you start seeing the outline of another prison, the image of who you believe you should be. The illusion of the idealized self. We all carry a version of ourselves in the future, a polished, perfected self that finally gets it right. This image is seductive. It promises relief. It tells us that once we become that person, we'll finally be free from shame, from judgment, from the gnawing sense of not being enough. But here's the trick. That idealized self was born from rejection, not love. Carl Jung would call it a projection of the ego's fantasy, not the self's truth. And chasing it feels like running toward heaven with bricks tied to your feet. The gap between who you are and who you think you should be becomes a wound. Every time you fail to meet the standard, guilt whispers, "See, you're still broken." It's a loop. More effort, more failure, more shame. The mind, obsessed with control, keeps feeding this fantasy, believing that perfection equals safety. But perfection is a lie. The archetype of the hero doesn't become whole by being flawless, but by confronting the shadow. And you can't confront the shadow if you're busy pretending you don't have one. Real life doesn't match the Instagram version of spiritual awakening. Sometimes it looks like crying on the floor after meditation. Sometimes it looks like rage surfacing in therapy. That's healing too. But when the image of the ideal self becomes the goal, these moments feel like failure. You begin to compare your healing process with an internal myth. And the worst part, you start hiding your true feelings, not from others, but from yourself. That's not wisdom. That's repression disguised as virtue. Try this. Look at a photo of yourself from childhood. Not to pity that kid, but to remember who you were before you started performing. That kid didn't need to deserve love. They just were. Bring that same innocence to your healing. Let be messy. Let be human. Let go of the guru mask. Because the person you're trying to become might be the very one stopping you from becoming who you already are. Identity shaped by aspiration often becomes a prison made of light. And yet, just beyond that shimmering cage, something stirs. A whisper from deep within. The forgotten voice that never asked for perfection, only presence. But to hear it, to truly meet it, one must do something radical. Stop climbing. Stop striving. And instead, turn inward. Not to improve, but to accept. That's where the real magic happens. That's where we start to see the path to something even more daring than growth. Radical acceptance. The return to radical acceptance. There comes a moment in every seeker's path where the striving just breaks. Not from failure, but from exhaustion. And in that collapse, something sacred emerges. The realization that maybe nothing was ever broken in the first place. Radical acceptance isn't passive surrender. It's the fiercest act of self-trust. It's looking at the mind, with all its guilt, shame, trauma, and perfectionism, and saying, "You get to stay." Carl Jung might call this the reconciliation with the shadow, welcoming back what was exiled in the name of becoming. Imagine waking up and not having to fix anything. Not your morning routine, not your body, not your past. Just breathing in the mess of life and saying, "I'm here," and that's enough. That's not laziness. That's deep psychological maturity. It's the art of living, not just surviving. When you stop trying to impress your inner critic, something wild happens. Peace returns. Not the kind you meditate to find, but the kind that rises when the war ends. Here's a practice. Try doing nothing productive for one full afternoon. No improvement, no reading, no healing. Just be. Sit in the sunlight. Walk barefoot. Let your inner dialogue soften. You'll notice how violently the ego resists this. "You're wasting time," it screams. But beneath that panic is a wound that never needed fixing, just witnessing. And in that stillness, you'll feel it. The self doesn't demand effort. It asks for permission. People don't burn out from doing too little. They burn out from the constant pressure to perform, even in their healing. That pressure isn't divine. It's internalized trauma dressed up as discipline. And when that mask falls, What's left is astonishingly human. The mind softens, the breath deepens, and for the first time in a long time, you feel whole. Not perfect, not cured, just whole, as in nothing missing, nothing to hide. That's what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, becoming who you are, not who you think you should be. And maybe, just maybe, the cure was never meant to be chased. Maybe it arrives when we stop looking, when we drop the armor, the performance, the obsession, and listen, not for the next answer, but for the silence underneath it all. That silence doesn't lead to another version of yourself. It leads back to you. And once you taste it, everything you thought healing was begins to unravel. But that unraveling, it's just the beginning. You've spent so long trying to fix yourself that you forgot how it feels to just be not perfect, not enlightened, not healed, just real. So here's the question. What would happen if you stopped? If you dropped the mask, the pressure, the spiritual gymnastics? Who would you meet beneath all the strategies for improvement? Maybe the self you've been chasing is actually the one you abandoned the moment you thought you were broken. What if your guilt wasn't a flaw, but a signal? What if your exhaustion was sacred? Maybe it's not weakness, but wisdom calling you back home. You don't need another course. You don't need another book. You need a pause, a reckoning, a radical moment of honesty with yourself. And that begins now, not when you deserve it, but because you already do. This is not about giving up. It's about waking up. So, tell me, what would change in your life if you stopped performing healing and started embodying wholeness? Would you finally let yourself rest? Would you finally speak your truth? Or would you keep hiding behind the next improvement? If this message shook something inside you, then subscribe, hit the bell, and stay close, because the real work we're doing here, it's not to fix you. It's to bring you back to life.